Hey everybody, this is Autoblog Podcast producer Eric here. I'm just hopping in quickly at the beginning of the episode to let you know that this episode of the Autoblog Podcast is brought to you by the SoFi Daily Podcast. Reaching financial independence starts with having the right information. So every weekday morning, SoFi keeps you up to date with important business news and stock market happenings and how they affect your financial life. So get your money right and search for SoFi, that's SOFI, wherever you get your podcasts. On with the show.
Welcome back to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is senior editor for all things green, John Snyder. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going? Beautiful day today. Beautiful week. Summer's winding down, which I feel okay about.
I'll say this. I kind of like September. Just, you get into cider, football, fall beers, lots of good stuff coming up. So September 1st is generally okay with me.
Yeah, I'm going to be missing the Michigan football this year for sure, but still love everything else about the fall.
It's going to be weird. No Big Ten football. My Michigan State Spartans won't be playing. But I did read somewhere that they might try and start the season by like Thanksgiving. So
cool.
That's pretty late, but it would still be technically fall for like three weeks. So
yeah,
who knows? We'll see. But we have a great show for you today. John spent some time in the Honda Odyssey. You got to check his review out. He tells you exactly where it fits in the minivan market right now. So check that out. We're going to talk more to him about that, though. I drove the Mercedes AMG GLC 43. Had a lot of fun with that. My thought is like, is this exactly an AMG? But we'll tease that out. We'll get into that. And John drove the Polestar. Was this the 1 or the 2? I think it was the 1, right?
The two.
The 2. All right. Cool.
The new one, the all-electric sedan.
There we go. You drove the sequel, right? There you go. All right. That should be a lot of fun. We'll talk about that. Speaking of green cars, we do have an interview with Henrik Fisker. So continue listening along for that. We'll get to that after our news segment, which is where we're going to dive into the Chrysler 300, which you're probably thinking, what's new about that? Well, the answer is actually not much, but there's more to kind of peel the onion back a little bit about just what's going on there. This is one of the cars that is a very important vehicle for Chrysler and at one time for the industry, and it's just sort of kind of withering out there. So we're going to talk more about that. Finally, we'll spend your money. So let's jump right in. Honda Odyssey. This is, I think it's right up there at the top of the segment, which is not very big, but there's a lot of the vehicles that are in it are very good. Let's put it that way. We had a long-term Pacifica. That one was the plug-in that we really liked. I know you and I really liked it. But just tell us about the Odyssey.
Well, yeah, the Odyssey, it's pretty much, if you've driven this new generation that came out, as a 2018 model year, it's going to seem pretty familiar to you. Some new looks, especially up front, the grille, the bumper, new trim piece out back, LED lights, things like that. They jumbled around the trim levels a little bit. The biggest thing that I noticed, it's not really a big deal, but so Honda improved the braking feel with an electronic brake booster. All well and good. I didn't really notice a difference since the last. I know it's been, probably a year and a half or more since I've driven the Odyssey. But what that brake booster enabled was the adaptive cruise control to come to a complete stop and resume. Low speed follow is Honda's parlance for it, and it works really well. And that's something that has frustrated me to no end, is when you get below, what is it, like 17 miles an hour or something, and the car just kicks you out of the adaptive cruise control, and you have to sort of take over at the last second. Way less than ideal. Now this new one, I did find a traffic jam and get into it to test it out, and it works really well. I think there's like maybe 4 different following distances, but the close distance I thought was pretty good for not letting everyone just pull in front of you, and still giving you plenty of space behind the vehicle in front of you for a nice slow stop. Now there are also a few aesthetic updates and things like that inside. Like we had the elite trim, which is the top of the line trim. It's got some new piano black trim in there and things like that. Just little tweaks here and there. Piping on the seats, second row perforated leather, that just help sort of keep it feeling fresh. They added these cool, I really like them, these cool tricolor floor mats in some of the higher trim levels. And they made things like the Honda sensing that with the driver assist thing standard in all trim levels. And still a great minivan. I think those little tweaks helped it sort of keep pace with what else is out there. I still this is a close second for me behind the Honda. I mean, behind the Pacifica Hybrid. I just love that minivan. The Odyssey maybe feels a little bit more refined here and there. The tech is sort of a toss up. They're both really good. Uconnect or Honda's high end infotainment system's really good. And then the Odyssey has things like cabin watch, so a camera that shows you into the back seat, and like a rear seat reminder that it incorporates that, so you make sure you don't leave anything back there. But yeah, just some little tweaks to help it keep fresh. But I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the Sienna, the Toyota Sienna coming out, because that could shake up this segment quite a bit.
The Sienna is, if I recall, it's pretty old, largely unchanged. I actually drove one when I moved. Wow, this was probably 10 years ago. I've moved, a few times since, but that's like the most memorable, I'd say, experience I've had in the Sienna. And it hasn't, again, it's changed since then, but it's still a very evolutionary vehicle. I'm with you. I think, depending on just how Toyota tries to approach this segment and what they do with this minivan, I think it could really shake it up. I think there really could be a market for a Toyota minivan. I think that could be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, you've got your Toyota loyalists who love the reliability of Toyota, and they do some things really, really well. And I think the new Sienna looks pretty good. It kind of has that, especially in back, has sort of a squared off, almost SUV looking rear half from like the halfway through the rear doors and behind that. It looks really good. And yeah, just the fact that it's going to be a hybrid too could really make it feel more refined. Obviously, more efficient. So that could be pretty cool. But I'm going to wait to pass judgment on that. But so far, it's looking really promising.
Yeah, I really think the hybrid element of the Chrysler is a game changer for them. Having that plug-in capability, I think that allows them to reach people who might not normally consider the Chrysler brand. Like let's say you need a minivan, and we both are parents, and you really see the benefit of a minivan as opposed to other vehicles. Obviously, you see the trade-offs too. I actually really like them. I don't have any true compromises, but once you sort of make that decision, like, hey, I need a minivan, there's not that many out there, and then you say to yourself, well, I can get a plug-in hybrid. Okay, you probably wouldn't expect that the Pacifica would be the option,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if Toyota can sort of answer that, that's kind of a game changer. And I like the end of your article, like the last probably 3, 4 paragraphs, the way you went through the like the pecking order of, where they rank. And yeah, I'd agree with you. I think put the Pacifica Hybrid first, and then you go with the Odyssey, just because, even though I haven't driven this new one, I mean, what I do know about the Odyssey is it's all around a very strong vehicle.
Mhm.
It's always been it does so many different things well. So yeah, I'd agree with that order. I think it's going to be a more competitive segment for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. What'd you do with it? Anything fun?
Just ran a bunch of errands with it. Wally insisted I put his car seat in the very, very back, in the third row of the Odyssey, which I was like, oh great, I gotta wedge this, back behind these seats. But the
Yeah,
second row
that's tricky.
seats, if you've got the just the captain's chairs in the second row, they can slide not only forward and back, but left and right. So you can push everything over to one side, and it makes it real easy to get back there. And so yeah, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll put your car seat in the third row, and you can hang out back there, and I can keep an eye on you with the camera, and I can talk to you. It has cabin talk, so it projects there's a mic up front, and it projects your voice through the speakers in the back. So Wally could hear me if I was trying to talk to him, and yeah, pretty cool. But yeah, mostly just filled it with 6 40-pound bags of cat litter and a bunch of groceries,
Wow.
and yeah, just ran some errands with my son.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's one of the things I've noticed about minivans is just how like good they are at car seats. I
Mhm.
like just getting that car seat into those like essentially the captain's chairs in the Pacifica, super
Yeah.
easy. It's the level it's like the easiest possible thing, you know,
Yeah.
compared to say, I don't know, the Ford Explorer, which is obviously a, large family hauling SUV. That was a pain. And it really wasn't anything about the Explorer. It was just more like you've got this kind of jacked up vehicle that you got to like climb into,
Right.
you got to climb over stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like, that's one of those things where it's like, if you could say, hey, man, I want a minivan, I mean, just the benefits and like the sort of the quality of your life when you're trying to
Yeah.
move people and stuff, it's really tough to beat.
Yeah, something to be said for it, especially if you have multiple kids, just trying to wrangle them all into the car. If they can, open the door and close it on their own with the push of a button, and they can climb in on their own, from either side, and you're not lifting them up and, doing all that. That's a real time saver when you're really trying to get out the door, to get them to school or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, giving them, handing that little job off to them and giving them some independence, I think is a really cool thing about minivans. I never would have even thought about that until I had a kid of my own, but it's the reality of the situation. It's much easier to get in and go in the Honda Odyssey than it is in my wife's GLK. It's it's playing Jenga with my son, trying to get him into the back seat there. Yeah.
No, that's so true. And I would say it's sort of like if you're like, let's just say, we still had offices we went to and things like that. And you generally get into work at 9 and you're throwing your kid in the car and you need to move. The minivan is the thing that you're going to be most comfortable and restored in, I would say, just for its comfort and then the ease of getting the kids in and out of the car. Like it's the vehicle you want to be messing with when it's like 50 degrees and windy and you just stepped out of the shower and your hair's wet and you're like messing around, the dog's jumping around. The minivan gets you on the road quicker is what I would say.
Yes, for sure. Especially if you're making lots of stops.
Yes.
It's a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Would you, I'm curious, you had the Elite trim. Would you say it felt like luxurious or premium? I mean, did it feel like in keeping with, I'm sure it probably was not cheap. I mean, how did it feel?
Pretty good. There's actually, a lot of things in their materials and sort of aesthetics that remind me of Acura. So it's definitely, it's the top of the line one, and it's 49 starts at, I think 49 maybe with Destination.
Yeah, that's about right. I mean,
But
when I look at like what minivans, like how much stuff you could get on them, I actually think they're
yeah,
pretty reasonably priced.
right, and it's had the little vacuum in the back. It had the Blu-ray player for the rear seats.
Nice.
So it's got a lot.
All right. Any final Odyssey thoughts?
Yeah, man, I just can't wait to try the Sienna and see how much I still like the Odyssey. The Odyssey's held up for the past couple of years really well, and I think these little changes do a lot to help bring it up to speed. But yeah, there's more coming down the pipeline, as there always is.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So let's shift gears here. I drove the GLC 43.
Yeah.
This is the AMG. It's interesting because for me, the question I kept talking about is like the AMG element of it. It's a relatively smaller crossover, like C segment, if you will, as the name implies. It's pretty powerful, that's for sure. And it's like sort of like the lower, like the lower cut, if you will, as far as the AMG lineup. It was pretty nice. This one had 385 horsepower. They actually gave that a boost from 2019. It's up 23 horsepower. So,
Nice.
I mean, frankly, 23, do the math. What is that? 362 horsepower, and 19 was more than enough, I think. Had the paddle shifters. It had the red seat belts. This one was actually done how I would do it too, with like the wiry wheels and kind of like a cobalt shade of gray, charcoal heather kind of thing. It just looked like badass. I thought it looked really, but in a subtle way. So
Yeah,
it was fun. I really liked it.
and it'll still rip 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds.
Yeah, that's
it's
exactly it.
It's a fast little crossover. I can't really talk too much. Well, depending on when this goes live, but the Audi Sq8 I just drove is this little sort of small crossover sporty segment. I don't know. I was not always super into that idea. Like, I don't need my crossover to do sub 5 second 0 to 60 sprints,
Right.
but it is really fun. I mean, they're great cars to drive. I mean, all the Mercedes crossovers, especially the smaller ones, they do handle pretty well. They definitely feel the sporty part. I'm not sure if the 43. I don't know. Did the 43 really feel like an AMG to you? I mean,
Yeah, so it's funny you should say that. After I drove it, I went and got some Mediterranean takeout. I'm like pretty far away, just because I drove it earlier, and I was like, God, I want to keep driving this thing. So I was like, yeah, let's go get some takeout, like on the other side of town, because I was sort of intrigued by the notion of like, yeah, is this an AMG? And I guess what I would say is yes. ... The only thing that like I would sort of knock it for is when I think of AMGs, I think of the AMGs like with the 6.3 on the front quarter panel. That to me is like, just the real meat and potatoes AMGs. But they've grown the line. I mean, really, it hasn't been that, like what I just said, in about 5 or 6 years or longer, right? I mean,
right.
We've had a lot of different AMGs since like, 14, somewhere in there, maybe even longer. They've been really stretching the lineup. So all that is like, I'd say prologue is to say, yeah, I mean, basically it did. And I think it felt like the right AMG treatment for the GLC too. You don't need a crazy amount of like just smoke and power. You just need like 380 some horsepower, plenty. You can actually get a 63 and a 63S. So if you wanted, you could get 503 horsepower out of this thing. Candidly, I don't think you need to do that. If you want that motor, you really don't need this. Like, the GLC isn't what you want to drop it into, I don't think. But I mean, as I kind of talk around my answer to your question, I mean, it had the paddle shifters. It certainly looked the part. This looked as good as any AMG I've ever driven, frankly, outside of some really exotic ones. But it steered pretty well. It sounded good. It was quick. Yeah, I mean, I think the way I would just kind of bring it all together is just say, yeah, it does. The notion of AMG has changed, but this felt like what AMGs are today.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And it was fun. I mean, like, this is the right crossover for people who maybe, like, it's sort of coupe styled. It's not a ton of headroom. There's actually an okay amount of room in the back. It's not like a real, like, SUV. This is like definitely more like the lower, like, size crossover. You know, I could see the GLC 300 being the right vehicle for a lot of people. Just, you know, you really drop down into just like normal Mercedes crossover at that point.
Which is already like really good, especially when you get, you know, the MBUX is great. You know, the everything they're doing with the interiors now is great. You know, they drive certainly well enough for your daily needs at that point.
Yeah.
That seems like sort of the sweet spot there.
It's I mean, in this segment, I found myself like, normally they're not that crazy exciting unless you sort of step up a little bit here, but I was like whipping through the different modes, like dropping down gears with the paddles. Some dude in like a Cadillac, I think it was an AT4, was like literally going stoplight to stoplight with me. He'd pull up and like he looked over and I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, you want to do a hard launch here? Let's do it, man. I'm sure he probably had like the 3.6 liter V6 in that GM engine, which is fine, or it might have been that Turbo 4 they use. I don't know. It was dark out. But yeah, I could tell like after like we pulled up and I just took off, he looked over like, oh wow, what's that guy have? That's not just some guy in a Mercedes just GLC thing. So that was fun. I don't know if have you driven the 9-speed DCT lately in Mercedes parlance?
It's been a while.
It bugged me a little bit, to be honest. The shifts were good, like 3, 4, 5, but like getting like 1, 2, 3 was weird. It just had this like awkward like first like step. So yeah, I don't know. That was bugging me a little bit. And it actually, I would put it into sport mode, then shift or paddle pull rather than deal with it myself. I don't know. So that was a little kind of thing. The ambient lighting, man, any color you want, man, any way you want it. That was sometimes I forget just how good Mercedes interiors are. And, you know,
they've been killing it lately.
Yes.
Like I love, like I mean, every Mercedes I've been into that's, fairly new, just excellent ambiance inside, really nice aesthetics, really nice design, really nice materials, and the lighting is superb. Some people aren't like a fan of fancy interior lighting like that, but I love it. I'm trying to put LED colored lights up in my basement,
nice.
just to try to capture that, because it's just really cool.
Yeah, especially like a kind of like a late, like early evening twilight drive when it's just, it was, like I said, my original plan was get some food on the corner. Then I'm like, well, I'm going to drive 10 miles, I think, and go get something. So, cool. So that's the Mercedes GLC. A lot of fun. I actually think as Cadillac grows the V lineup, there's a lot of takeaways they could use from what Mercedes has done with AMG. Way to authentically make, the V series something and then make the higher levels of the Vs. I know they were talking about one what are they going to call it? The Blackwing, I think.
Yeah.
That engine that's really amazing, and they were looking for ways to use it broader. I mean, this to me is a template, make it feel authentic. I think Mercedes has done it in a better way than BMW has done with all the different M's and M Sports.
The competitions and
Yeah, I get confused in the lower ones. The M cars to me are still fine, still great. But like some of the lower level ones,
sure.
You're like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? And it like looks the part and it sort of drives the part, but then you're like, oh, well, wait a minute, So it's very subjective too. But what about the Polestar? That is a very big deal car. It's electric. You got to drive it last month, I believe. It's September 1st already. Tell us about that.
Yes, jeez. Man, I fell for this car. I fell in love with it. It's, this sort of chunky, blocky, minimalist looking sedan on the outside. It looks muscular. Big, wide, flat pieces of sheet metal with like a little sort of submarine glass house above it. And it's sort of dark and broody. It's got a body colored logos on it, which is really cool. Inside the interior, there's two interiors. There's like a vegan sort of weave interior, and then there's a Napa leather interior. And apparently the take rate is largely the weave interior, and it was really nice. Again, it's some of that Volvo minimalism, but with sort of a dark side to it. It's just you get in and you're sort of, you're like, okay, I'm going to take this thing seriously, and then man, it feels super fast. Again, it's a little less than 5 seconds 0 to 60, but that first 30 miles per hour, your eyes sort of float back in your skull, just because that low end torque is so instant, and it handles really well. It's a heavy car, but it handles really well. I found it had tons of grip, and it communicated really well when it was starting to give that up lateral grip. But it's all wheel drive, all electric. It's Polestar's second car. Their first one was a $150 or so thousand, $100,000+ plug-in hybrid. Everything they do from now on out is going to be all electric, and so they're putting their first like real foot forward to like the mass market, to the consumer. And yeah, it definitely it's super sporty, very sleek, different. It's unlike other cars out there, and I just had a hell of a time with it. It was really fun, and it has the Google Android Automotive operating system. So basically, it's got this big tablet style screen like you'd see in like a Tesla Model 3. It still has an instrument cluster though too, and that's also digital. But it uses Google Assistant and has built-in Google apps like Google Maps for navigation and whatnot. And you can still do CarPlay with it, wireless CarPlay if you want. But I found the Android functionality is just really, really smooth, really quick. The voice operation is really, really intelligent. It can understand a lot of things, and you just have this wealth of the information of the internet at hand when you're driving it. And not having to repeat yourself over and over like I do with Siri. I'm an Apple user. It was really nice, really slick, quick, smart, intuitive, and the way they have it all laid out in the menus, they're all the fonts are even really sort of beautiful. It's pretty cool. It's impressive what they're doing with this car. I think they really put a good foot forward with the Polestar too.
That's a very interesting take on the Android thing. I don't think I'd ever buy a car for its operating system, but I could see some people doing it. Like there's like literally really hardcore Android fans. I always had an iPhone just for years. I have just different iPhones.
Me too.
Yeah, it was the easiest thing. But then I did get the Pixel 3a earlier this year, which seems so long ago. I've only had this phone for about 6 months, but it just opened my eyes up. I'm like, do I honestly generally prefer iPhones? Yes. But at the time, the prices were not competitive, and all the reviews, I was talking to our friends at Engadget, and they were like, look, you could pay twice as much for an iPhone, or you could get the Pixel, and it's as good, if not better. So long story short, that's why I did it. So it's interesting that the system could work so well for Android and Apple users in the car. And I think that could become a thing, actually, as you think about it, as the technology evolves.
Yeah, I mean, I think GM will be the next to use it in the car. Okay. I honestly don't remember which vehicle. But yeah, Polestar is the first to do it, and so far so good. It works pretty well.
Looking at your story, so John had this piece that went up. You had this must have had in early August, actually, because the piece was published on, I want to say, the 19th of August. It's a striking looking car. I think Volvo design has really, made them just such I think a force in the premium segment. It's, they've gone away from the quirky to I think legit chic and cool. And that's, Polestar really just embodies that, the wheels, the lights, it's really good looking. 408 horsepower. Sure. That sounds great to me. And I think what's cool, you made a reference about how there's nothing extra. There's, nothing superfluous here. There's not a lot of chrome. It's just it's very, I think, impressive by less is more is the way to put it, I would say. So
yeah, really well executed in that way. It makes it feel sort of, I don't know, sinister.
Yeah. So this would probably compete against the Model 3, right?
Yeah. Model 3 or Model Y. It's sort of in that size range. It's a little bit bigger of a sedan, sort of a sportback thing going on. Yeah. I would prefer. I mean, honestly, I prefer the Polestar just because it's different. You can't get as high a performance as certain levels of the Teslas, but what it's got is plenty for me, and it's really user friendly. You have an actual instrument cluster, which is
nice.
Always a plus. But yeah, everything about it feels high quality, really solid, well put together. Yeah,
I think they're doing a nice job of building the Polestar brand too. Polestar, I mean, they may not have a huge amount of brand awareness, but if you saw that thing rolling around, a downtown area, it'd be like, well, one, that's cool. Two, what's a Polestar? And that gets you sort of into the conversation with Tesla. If that just said Volvo S30 or 40 or something, people would be like, okay, great, he's got a Volvo. Oh, it's a hybrid, which is what people use to describe everything. You'll lose your cool points. But, when it's a Polestar and it's well, actually, it's all electric, you can see it charging. I don't know. I think that really, I was a skeptic. I was like, what is Volvo doing? They don't have the money to be doing this. And, hey, to me, this looks like a very, success.
Yeah, should be good. I'm excited to see. First time I see one out in the wild, I'm gonna be pretty excited.
Nice. And how do you buy a Polestar now? Is I think because they had a number of weird way, maybe not weird, but unconventional, non-traditional ways to do it. Is it all online? How do you get a Polestar?
No, they are. They are doing they're doing dealerships. They've
Okay.
had a few pop-up ones in select cities, but now they're building, actual dealerships. They're working with current Volvo dealers to have their own sort of standalone Polestar dealerships. And if you live within a certain radius from one of these dealerships or service centers, 150 miles or something, they'll come and pick it up for you and leave you a loaner and take it to service it. And yeah, they're expanding the cities that they're putting it in right now. I think it'll be in 6 cities maybe by the end of the year. I don't know. I'll have to look through my notes and I'll post that in the comments on our podcast post page. But yeah, they're expanding, and it'll be a traditional dealership sort of thing. And there's not a lot of options you can choose. But basically, there's for this model year, every Polestar is a launch edition, which includes like a luxury package. The only thing you can really opt up is you can pay a few hundred extra dollars for a different color, or the performance pack, which is I think what was the price on that? I don't know, it's in the article. It was maybe $4,000, $5,000, and that gives you bigger, better wheels and things like that. But basically, everything else is like included in the price. Is you just sort of choose what you want as a no cost option. You can pay more for the Napa leather too, but any other sort of customization is just in the built into the price, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, I kind of like that. Simple is good, especially for something like this, where it's a little bit of I think if you're thinking Volvo or Polestar, you're maybe looking at it more of a non-traditional dealer experience potentially, or you're open to it, and you're open to just maybe there are a different way of doing things, even if there is still elements of the traditional car buying transaction. So yeah, simple is good. I mean, I especially like the way like so many things are different. Like as we kind of get through the pandemic, it's like, if you said you could get this electric car and it's like a no haggle price, this is just what it costs, and like these are your choices, and boom, 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 it's in the city. That's pretty appealing to me. I mean, I especially if you're already in that electric car mindset. So
yeah. Oh, and that performance package, $5,000. It's got the special Brembo brakes that are sort of co-designed by Brembo and Polestar that
nice.
you see on some of the Polestar tuned Volvos. It's also got the manually adjustable Öhlins dampers that you see on some of the Polestar tuned Volvos.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so kind of a neat little thing. Our tester was set like sort of in the middle, which is probably about where I keep it. It was a good balance of comfort and stiffness and contact in the corners. But yeah, it is. I can't wait to drive one again, to be honest.
Yeah, that's when I look at some of the different cars that have been going through our fleet. That's up there. I mean, obviously the Bronco is going to be amazing, but that's still pretty far away, and it's almost like, that again, that's far away, but it's like, oh wow, yeah, that's Polestar is something I would be really interested to drive and really like get into like all the different like things it does and how does it feel. Yeah, I mean that's the kind of car that I'd almost think, wow, if I was going to buy an electric car, what about this? And then there's pros and cons to it, but I like the vibe that the car has. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, let's shift gears here to we have one news segment. Now, if you're listening to this, we're actually recording this September 1st, so it's the top of the month. A lot of big news is happening this week. But we'll probably get to that in upcoming podcasts. Things like the S-Class, things like the Jeep Grand Wagoneer, lots of stuff going on. But we're actually recording this a little earlier in the week than we normally do. So one news note that we're kind of looking back at, if you will, is we had a report last week about the Chrysler 300. I wrote that it's kind of withering. They're going to sort of cull a couple of trim levels from the lineup. So it's going to be, it's sort of going the direction of the Polestar. Only it's a little weird for an American car that used to have a ton of trim levels and options and things like that. The 300C is going away, which if, you're like a Chrysler fan or an enthusiast, that was like the big V8 engine. And that sort of defined what the 300 was to me when it first came out, like 15 years ago. It was like this V8 powered muscle sedan that then sort of, then the Charger or the Challenger and Charger and the Dodge Magnum, which I really think was underappreciated. All those things kind of like flowed from that. And, of course you could get a V6 300, even like right when it came out. Like that wasn't so much the thing, but it was like the idea was that it was like a V8 muscle car. And the 300C was like that was the car. So, I mean, maybe we're splitting hairs a little bit because, again, you can still get that Hemi. It's just more like an option. I should note that Cars Direct is the one that appears to have obtained an order guide. So, yeah, give them credit where credit's due. And we, of course, have the story on our site. I don't know. I mean, to me, big picture, what's weird about this is the Charger lineup and the Challenger lineup keep growing. We just pricing on the Charger just came out recently. I mean, they're all in. The Charger is going to live forever, it seems like, and maybe the Challenger. I think maybe this speaks more to the Chrysler brand, that it doesn't really seem to have all that much of a future. I mean, the two vehicles that Chrysler makes, the 300 and the Pacifica, are pretty good. And it's like, it was the name of the company until they decided to call themselves Stellantis. Like, I mean, to get really as I'm kind of like getting more and more meta here, it seems kind of like a bad idea to kill off your namesake brand, and your flagship car is sort of like withering on the vine. So, I mean, maybe it's possible I'm reading too much into this, but I don't know.
I mean, sales have been falling, and it's like, are sales falling because they're not really doing anything with it on the Chrysler side, or are they not doing anything with it on the Chrysler side because sales are falling? It's hard to. I want to imagine a world where this has continued to sell through Chrysler, expanding the lineup or doing new things with updating it in some ways, like Dodge has continued to do with its vehicles. It's weird. Chrysler is a weird thing right now. The actual Chrysler brand of vehicle, because it's just so small, and really curious to see what happens with 300. I would love to see an updated version. I would love to see. I don't know. I'd love to see a Hellcat version.
Yeah, it's odd. I think that they haven't really invested more into this brand. Maybe there's something, I don't know, that's like, happening. I don't know, that, behind the scenes, but
yeah,
I don't know. I'll admit this is super insidery, but I remember like when I was really like not just getting into this industry, but like actually realizing it was like, oh, hey, you can make a career out of writing for these like car publications, which I had no idea was a thing when I was in college, really. I mean, of course I read them, but I had no idea how you would go about getting such a job. But like the 300, like early 2000s, Chrysler was cool, Dieter Zesche, their CEO, Dr. Z. And this was the car, that really put them out there. So it's a little odd. Maybe there's more here. Maybe, the other thing too is like, maybe if you're placing your bets, you're like, Charger, rear wheel drive, muscle car, muscle sedan, Chrysler 300, time seems to have moved on. everybody who's got one, that wants one, has one, and maybe it's moving into more like an old man car. I don't know. I mean, I always liked it too. And I'll admit my tastes tend to skew very old, historic. But I mean, what's not to like? A well-appointed rear-wheel drive car? Like, sure. You know?
I always liked it too. I thought it was well executed.
Yeah. So anyways, before we write its obituary, they're still selling it. It's just they've made some tweaks to the lineup. And they're not the kind of tweaks that get you excited. Let me put it that way, you know? So I guess we'll leave it there. More to come. Let's join now. John and I caught up with Henrik Fisker, who is one of the more, well-traveled people in the car business. Former designer at BMW, Aston Martin, of course, started Fiskar Automotive. He's got some new ventures. So much going on. You know, I think it's fair to call him an automotive pioneer. John and I had a great conversation with him. Let's have a listen. All right. Well, joining us now on the podcast is Henrik Fisker. He's a familiar name and face to so many of the Autoblog listeners, so many different ventures over the years. I think it's very fair to call him an electric vehicle pioneer. He was in the space almost before anybody. One of the tenets of like the original Fiskar Automotive was just style, which Henrik, of course, brought from all of his years working for Aston Martin and BMW and other places. So welcome, first of all. How are you, Henrik?
Thank you. I'm doing great out here in California. Despite being locked down, still everything is good.
Sounds good. Glad to see you're looking and feeling well. That's good. We're all working remotely here, so the car industry rolls on. Why don't you tell us about your latest venture? I know, for Autoblog readers, they've followed your career and all the different things you've been doing, but just like kind of for people who are parachuting in, thinking, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" What's sort of like the 30-second synopsis? What's going on?
Yeah, even before COVID, we actually decided, as we started Fiskar Inc., to sort of make the world's first digital car company. And what we mean by that is that you would do everything digitally when it comes to the customer interface. So we created an app last year, which we launched, and you will be reserving, buying your vehicle, leasing your vehicle through Fiskar directly. We'll deliver the vehicle at home. We'll pick it up if it needs service. So the whole idea was to really have this seamless experience of e-mobility, so to speak. And on top of that, we also are working on a very unique new car lease where you would not have any fixed terms. So you can give back the car anytime, whether it's after 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. And all service would be included, all maintenance. And we would keep these vehicles over an 8-year period. So when somebody gives it back, we would then put it back out in the field for a lower price, which means maybe a college student can, lease this vehicle after 6 years, but it's under full warranty, of course, a lot lower price and no hassle. So that was sort of the main concept. Now, obviously, I'm a car guy, so I love, doing beautiful, emotional cars, and that is part of the picture. And on top of that, I also felt that we need to sort of get to the next step when it comes to private, private mobility, in the sense that, the car has almost become a little bit of a hassle for our society, both in terms of emissions and in terms of congestion. So we set out to make the world's most sustainable vehicles, going beyond making them electric and really including a lot of recyclable materials, talking to our suppliers about how to make things in a better, more cleaner way. And that was that's part of our mission, is really a clean future for all, making the car, again, part of our society in a positive way, because I still believe no matter what happens, we like our personal mobility. We like our car.
All right. Sounds good. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Ocean?
Yeah, so our first vehicle will be the Fiskar Ocean, which is it's a premium luxury SUV, but our aim was to make it as affordable as possible. I think there's enough electric supercars out there. As you mentioned early on, we did our Fiskar Karma very early on, $100,000 vehicle, and I think that the next frontier is really who can make a really cool, sort of affordable electric vehicle. And we decided to go for a real SUV and not sort of a hatchback crossover, because it's really the fastest growing market. And our aim is not to take people who are already on an electric car out of their electric car and into ours, but our aim was, can we get some of the people who actually drives an SUV today to actually opt in for an electric cool SUV where they don't have to sacrifice in the styling, the utility, all the things they love about their SUV. And then we, of course, added a few extra cool features to our vehicle as well to make it stand out. We've got something called California mode, where you can push a button, roll down all the windows, including the rear hatch and the roof and everything. So we also wanted to create something that nobody else had on the market. And that's just the first of a range of vehicles we are planning. And that vehicle will go into production in end of 2022. So we're still early stage, but we have shared a lot of development with the public out there, and we already got well over 7,000. In fact, I think close to 8,000 reservations on the vehicle, despite being 2 years out. So far we've had a pretty exciting, feeling around that vehicle from a lot of customers.
When I last talked to you, you were first showing the Emotion, and that's just a beautiful car, and I'm excited about that too. What's the time frame on the Emotion?
Yeah, so the Emotion, once I was done with it, and I've spent several months around it, I kind of felt it's still not 100% there. I feel if you're going to do a 100,000 plus car, 98.3% isn't enough. It's going to be 100% there. So I felt it needed some more work. We were working also on a new battery technology that, quite frankly, didn't move as fast as we wanted to. We were working on solid-state batteries. Mm-hmm. We have filed about 10 patents on that, and we still have those, and we still want to find a way to move that forward. But we realized that there's no way we can get that technology to market as fast as we originally thought. There's just too much new stuff that had to be invented. So we decided to actually move the Emotion launch after the Ocean. We also think for our business model, we would be able to create a lot more revenue and profit with our Fiskar Ocean, and therefore be able to fund exciting vehicles like the Emotion. So the Emotion is still in the works. I'm going to do another take on the design. It needs more refinement. I'm going to do a few more radical things to the vehicle. And we haven't decided exactly when we're going to launch it yet, but if I had to guess, I would say sometimes maybe towards end of 2023 is probably the earliest realistic time we could do it. One of our concepts, by the way, at Fiskar is to get vehicles faster to market at high quality, and kind of also a real, I guess, differentiator to any other EV startup. We're in the middle of negotiating a lot of interesting collaborations on both manufacturing, because that's obviously one of the hardest things for any EV startup, and even somebody like Tesla, as Elon said, had to go through manufacturing hell and a lot of learnings. And quite frankly, I don't want to go through manufacturing hell if I can avoid it. So I'd rather skip that part of the. And I think there is a lot of, or at least there's several very capable contract manufacturers out there. So we're definitely going for contract manufacturing initially for our vehicles, just like Apple Foxconn. If you think about it, you probably never saw Tim Cook walk down a factory floor and bragging how good he is at making Apple phones. They're made by Foxconn, which is great for Apple. So that's sort of the playbook we're taking. And then when it comes to development, we also realized that we need a lot more volume to get into this sort of more affordable segment. So with that in mind, we have reached out to both very big suppliers and several OEMs where we're talking about how we can share components. So that's obviously something that takes some time. And I think we're pretty far along the line in terms of what we have forecasted on the Ocean. And we still need to make that happen with the Emotion as well, because that obviously needs to be a different, bigger platform, different parts. You need, bigger brakes, different suspension, all that stuff. But essentially, I think as we move into electrification, a lot of the things that we grew up with thinking, wow, that's amazing, those things are becoming commodities. And now those would be things like, I don't think in the future anybody cares anymore who steel stamps your platform or makes the steel stamp of that aluminum profiles in your platform. I think young people today, their first drive independently outside their parents in a car may not be in a 5-speed manual coupe, but rather in the backseat of an Uber that they called on their phone. So they have a completely different association with mobility that we had when we grew up and talked about how many valves per cylinder and what's the name of the brakes and 4-speed, a 5-speed, a 6-speed manual. So we have to adapt to that, and we have to understand what is building the brand, a car brand of the future. It's probably not those things I just mentioned.
That's it's interesting. That kind of echoes what Sergio Marchionne used to say a lot. He was, former CEO of Chrysler, obviously Fiat Chrysler, and that was, he even, I think, actually put out, like, on an earnings call, he famously made this statement how, like, the consumer isn't going to be concerned if your V6 is like this much tiny amount better than the other guy's V6, and he made this point that, like, obviously you want to be the best, but there's other things to focus on. So it's really an interesting time to be in the car business, all the new ways we can, cars can mean different things to people. Couple things that I think interesting, kind of like riff on what you just said. Henrik, do you want to just kind of give like a mini business update for your company? Like what's going on, like just the 30-second thumbnail, like what you guys are doing, what you can say, that sort of thing, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed on Fiskar Inc.
Yeah, I mean, having, started a car company once before, I've tried to take as many lessons learned as possible. And one of them is definitely you want to be really well financed. So we decided to merge into what we call a SPAC, which is essentially becoming a public company fairly early on, which you have seen a few other companies out there have done lately, both in somewhat the automotive space and also in some other areas like Virgin Galactic, for instance, it would be an example. And it allows us to get in hopefully well over $1 billion, which means we have enough funding to reach start of production with the Ocean. So that's a very important point. The merger still is to happen. We have to go through all the official channels with SEC, so we can't talk too much in details of that. But that is a very important part we are working on. Secondly, we are working on solidifying the bigger agreements and partnerships that's needed to get our vehicles to market. And, there's quite a lot of supply agreements you need to do. And I think a lot of people who have started or attempting to start an electric vehicle car company underestimate, just how difficult it is to do that. You have, over 1,000 parts in a car, and you're going to make an agreement even to something like the tires. You're going to purchase 300,000 tires a year, whatever it might be. And it's not like you just go and buy a tire. You also got to make sure that tire fits the weight and the handling and everything you expect of your vehicle. So that goes through all those developments. And that goes for all the other parts. So that's what we are working on. And of course, the bigger parts is signing final manufacturing agreements, et cetera. And all that is pretty much on schedule at this point in time. Where we fundamentally are different in our business model is that we do much more collaboration when it comes to, like I mentioned, developing specifically what we would call the commodity parts. And that can also be things like a steering rack, air condition, et cetera. And by going electric, like you just mentioned, about sharing a V6 engine, in fact, I would say probably the gasoline car industry had more difficulty sharing because, the engine was the heart of the car. Whereas with an electric car, I wouldn't necessarily say the electric motor is the heart of the car for the customer because they can't hear it. They're all powerful. They all have torque. Nobody will be able to, even I think the biggest connoisseur of electric vehicles would have a hard time blindfoldedly driving a car and saying, oh, that engine comes from Bosch or that engine comes from Conti. So I think you're going to end up seeing a lot more sharing on electric vehicles. And where we are focusing our IP development is, of course, in certain aspects of the powertrain to make it more optimized, but it's a lot around software. So whereas in the old days, everything was set up with a screwdriver, how tight is the steering rack and how's the brake feel? In the future, all that is set up via software. So we've opened up a software center in our innovation lab in Silicon Valley. We actually call it Source Code. And we have all the our software engineers sitting up there developing future technology and how we're going to control our vehicle all the way down to the motor controllers, to the battery management system, etc. And then, of course, we are building IP around design. That's one of our strong points. And I would say the Ocean is probably the least radical design you're going to see from Fisker. The other things we have in the works going to be a lot more radical. In fact, we're going to make some more surprises to the interior on the production Ocean when it comes out. And then, of course, there is, I think, IP and delights around the customer experience. Not only, I've already talked about when you buy the vehicle or lease the vehicle, but also when you use the vehicle. So the entire infotainment system, what are the entertainment for the customer? It used to be moving a gear shift or watching the rev counter or listening to the engine. Now you need to substitute those kind of entertainment values into what is that when you drive an electric car. And some people are still on the opinion it's fairly boring to drive an electric car because you don't have the rev counter, you don't have the sound. So what do you have? Well, that's what we are working on to figure out what do you have in the future that's going to give you that emotional connection with a car. So that's a big area of IP we are working on here in our headquarters in LA.
Is there anything about that specifically that you can tell us? Like, what are some of the things that are going to replace these sort of sensory experiences?
So we obviously don't want to give too much away to the competition because we're still 2 years away. And well, what I can give you some hints about is I think sound will become important, both externally, but definitely internally. Because like I mentioned, the engine sound is gone. So what are you listening to now apart from the annoying wind noise around the A-pillar? You don't want to listen to that. So you got to come up with something else. And that could be also a certain, I think the entire interior in terms of materials and forms and shapes, the haptic feels and everything else has to be different, more exciting. I think the fact, obviously, that we're going towards many different new type of screen technologies that are bendable, that can be placed different places in the vehicle. So we're looking at probably a different interaction on different things. But one of the things we have to take into consideration, I think, will actually change the direction everybody thought about interior design a couple of years ago. 2-3 years ago, all the car makers showed these cars without steering wheels, and everybody was making lounges and putting pillows in the cars and all that. And I think everybody's realizing, oh, shit, we actually aren't going to have cars without steering wheels next year. So, reality is, I believe that we're probably at least a car generation, 5 to 7 years away before you start truly having, and even that's questionable, when you're truly having level 5 vehicles where you have no steering wheel. So that means that we still need to have the attention of the driver. And that means you do need to think about how you operate those sort of entertaining parts in a car while you want the driver to focus and still be able to control, a vehicle which could have, many hundreds of horsepower and, it could be dangerous if you don't know how to control it. So that's something that we're spending some time on researching and figuring out, because we're sort of that middle road where there will be some automated features in a vehicle certain times, and then there will be other times where you need to be in control. So we need to figure out how we get the attention of the driver at the appropriate time. And I think that's going to be something the industry is going to be working on the next few years, and it'll have an impact on the interior, but I also think it'll have an impact on how we alert people at the right time. And one of the things that really annoys me right now with some of the new cars is these really annoying ding ding sounds when you change lane and somebody comes next to you. I mean, it's just, you can't tolerate it after a while. So, and you start becoming immune to it. So we need to come up with other things that kind of we can live with, but still alerts us. And I think the industry hasn't found out what that is yet, and we're working on it. And I think everybody's going to have to work on that.
So you've talked about some of the challenges there. What are some of the benefits to starting with electric powertrain and building a car around that. Is there any sort of design freedoms that you find in working with EVs?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, first of all, when you work on a gasoline car with all the latest rules and regulations, specifically want to sell it in Europe, you've got pedestrian safety, so you got to have a certain space between the engine and the hood to have flexibility when somebody lands on it, if you hit a pedestrian, etc. So a lot of those elements have driven up the latest cars, hoods very high cowls, and restricted designers to a certain extent. And that's probably why you don't see these super ultra low sedans and sports cars, gasoline cars anymore, specifically with their front engines. So I think the freedom there is much bigger on an electric car because you don't have these issues. You also don't have the issue where you have to package a large gas tank in the rear. Now you have to some different challenges. That's packaging a thick battery pack underneath the floor, which also poses a challenge if you want to make a super low, vehicle as well, where you're not sitting on the floor anymore. So those are some different challenges. But I think generally the design freedom with electric cars are bigger. And specifically when you come to the interior packaging and the proportions of the vehicle, there's a lot of opportunities there. I think at Fisker, what we're looking at is right now, I think everybody who makes electric cars are obsessed with, optimal space use and aerodynamics. And you kind of end up a little bit what we had in sort of the bad part of the design history with very slap-sided vehicles and, the first Audi 100 super aerodynamic, but kind of looked not that amazing. So I at Fisker, we're sort of saying, you know what, let's step out of the box for a moment and let's get a bit more emotional. Let's get a bit more human and let's think about, what could we really do which is different and cool? And then let's find out how we then incorporate, of course, aerodynamics and other things. So we're trying to sort of probably put ourselves more on the emotional side. And the same goes for using environmental friendly materials, which have never really been done much in the car industry. We are using all our carpets are recycled plastic bottles and fishing nets from the oceans. And yeah, it means that you need to maybe pay a little bit more. You have to do some unique things in that area. But I think this is the time to do all that. And I think we can find some customers who want to be part of that. It may not be for everybody. Just like, somebody wants to maybe buy a minivan and somebody wants SUV. And if you look at it purely from a utility aspect, we should all be driving minivans. But then again, nobody wakes up in the morning dreaming to buy a minivan. At least not a lot of people I know.
Henrik, I'm curious. You mentioned all these different ways you can approach the execution of the car. As you look at your company, is the plan to maybe appeal to a certain type of consumer who maybe seeks out this type of vehicle, or to be broader? What I find is really interesting right now is how there's so many car companies out there. Back when you and I first kind of met, if you will, and got to know each other, it was Fisker and Tesla, and then the legacy automakers, and maybe a few other guys. Now there's Bollinger. There's just all sorts of different ones. John could name probably all of them. But the field has gotten just so diversified and segmented. Whatever kind of EV you want, if you're willing to maybe put down some money and take a chance on a certain company or type of car, you can kind of get it, which is I think amazing. It reminds me a little bit of the car industry 115 years ago. So, what's maybe your long-term view? Are you guys going to try to appeal to a lot of people? Maybe just make one or two cars and stay small and nimble? What's the plan, I guess?
Yeah, first of all, just to sort of address where's the car industry going, I think it's almost a rebirth of the car industry. And I think the customer, if you look at other areas outside the car industry, we saw some years ago that the entire jeans industry got reborn. And I grew up with 3 jeans brands. It was Wrangler, Levi's, and then the cheap ones in the supermarket your parents want you to buy that no brand name, and that was about it. But now you got all kind of different jeans for hundreds of dollars and all that. And I think what happened was the customer and the consumer suddenly felt, they wanted something different. That suddenly people were offering something different, and people realized there's other people that can make jeans than just those three jeans brands. And I think what the customers today are realizing is, as we move into new technology, there is some companies out there which are able to actually fulfill some customer desires quicker and in a more radical way than maybe some of the traditional car companies can and want. So it's opened up a whole new era of upcoming, new car makers that can go out and be more radical and rethinking vehicles. If you look at, some of these other car brands out there, and I rarely, like to talk about other brands, and specifically if you want to hammer them. So let me say something good. If you look at some of those startups, like, you mentioned Bollinger, I think I saw they made like, that you could stick something through the entire car, right? I mean, from one end to you can actually literally see through it. I mean, that's something that you would just never do at a normal car maker. There would be 1,000 reasons why not to do it. Now, is it going to work or not? I don't know. But the point is they're doing it. And maybe somebody wants to stick an entire tree through that car, and that's great. And then you see, Rivian trying to do a whole different type of pickup truck, that can turn on a dime and, all kind of stuff. So you're seeing these companies, you see Nikola, coming out with some cool design looking trucks where people probably for 100 years said, well, nobody needs a nice looking truck because it's just moving stuff. Well, they decided, let's make a cool one and let's, use a different powertrain. So you're seeing some of that radical thinking that kind of was forbidden and stuck in the traditional industry has suddenly come alive in an crazy amount of innovation out there. And probably a lot of it won't make it, but it's extremely exciting. And I think, if nothing else, it pushes the traditional car industry to wake up, but it also, I think, opens up the consumer's imagination about, wow, what could a vehicle actually be? I thought I was stuck with this square box, that I've been driving for 10 years. And they're actually realizing, wow, there's whole new opportunities. And I think today, the customer is very different. They're willing to try new brands, new vehicles. They're not so scared as they were maybe 10, 20 years ago. And part of it is that you're looking at a new technology where there's really no reason why a new company couldn't be as good as an old company. So if you then talk about what does Fisker want to do? Well, I'm a car guy at heart. And I don't believe all the doomsday scenarios where, nobody's going to have the private car and everybody's going to be moved around little putts or, take these secret tunnel trains and, all that type of stuff. I actually think we're still, you look back in history, even way before cars, people wanted to have their own horse. They want to have their own private transportation. And I think that won't change as long as we're, alive. So, and part of having your own horse in the old days was not just you got on it and you rode it. It was who had the pretty horse, who had the fast horse, all this type of stuff. And that is kind of translating into vehicles, whether they're gasoline or electric. And if you have a scale of non-emotional, the minivan, and super emotional, the two-seater, supercar, we want to be towards that, emotional scale of extreme. When it comes to emotions, when it comes to design and desirability and excitement around the vehicle. I think what's changing with electric vehicles and where we want to be, we want to add to that emotional aspect where, of course, there's the cool emotional design, exterior and interior, but where we want to add to it is we want to bring out other features that allows younger people specifically to get into some of these cool cars. And one of the things that always bugged me when I grew up, I dreamt about all these cool cars, but I couldn't afford them. So, and then suddenly you get a family and 2 kids and you dreamt about this 2-seater sports car, now you can't afford it. So, okay, there it goes. So now what could we do to get younger people into more electric cars, environmental friendly cars, cool cars? Well, so we dreamt up this flexible lease, which is, I think, very attractive, where you don't have to sign up for 3 years. You don't have to make this big commitment. We're going to do it directly from Fisker. We're going to own the car. So we might even be flexible on credit history, age, We're going to try and do something with insurance. That's another big issue for young people, too high insurance. We want to lower that. So we're trying to come up with new innovative ways to give access to these vehicles, specifically for younger people who want to get into them. So where we want to be at the spectrum is we want to make the world's most sustainable and emotional vehicles, and we want to make them available to as many people as possible. For me, there's no limit. I don't think we have to say we want to be a niche car maker. I don't want to put a limit of how many cars we want to make. It all depends on how successful we are and how many people want to buy our vehicles. I don't think there's any limit.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So that's Fiskar Inc. and that's Henrik Fisker. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to talk to us today. It's always a pleasure, and glad we could have you on the podcast.
Great to see you guys again. Take care.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Henrik. It was great to catch up. A lot of fun. Pretty cool to just find out what's going on. I mean, wouldn't you say, John?
Always fun to talk to him. He's just, he's done so much and is continuing to do lots of stuff that is, especially in my wheelhouse. So exciting times for me.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting too, because no matter I think many of us and are intrigued by hybrids and electric vehicles. I mean, doesn't matter what's under the hood. Henrik Fisker knows how to design a gorgeous car.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, all right, moving on. Let's spend some money. Got a note here from one of our friends in West Michigan, looking to buy a summer/weekend car. Budget is around $100,000 plus minus. Daily driver is a CLS 550. I really like the CLS 550, so I just should throw that out there right now. No cars are not investments, but is looking for something that, isn't just going to be a total waste of money. So, hey, makes sense. Here are the requirements. Minimal depreciation, again. Ideally, it's depreciated enough and has bottomed out. Exotic supercar or rare, not too old. Looks, sounds, reliability, so all the visceral elements plus a dose of practicality. Would love to hear our thoughts on this. Well, this is one of the more fun ones that we've had in some time. I guess the one thing that, I guess the question I have here is it doesn't necessarily specify new or used. He mentions depreciation, so I'd assume it's a little more depreciated, like a used, literally something like exotic. But yeah, I mean, basically at this point, he's run away with it, spend his $100,000. So that sounds pretty fun to me.
Yeah. So my first thoughts was if I had $100,000 to spend on a used car, maybe something a little rarer. My first thought was some sort of Ferrari, and he says he wants dependability, so maybe not. But my first thought was a Ferrari 360. You can get the Moda now, you can get the Spider. There's sort of pick your flavor there. From what I understand, a little cheaper to maintain than some of the other Ferraris out there. Maybe a little on the old side for him. But what were you thinking?
Yeah, so what I would probably do is go back and look at I guess it depends exactly on what he wants to use it for. So I'm a little all over the place. I like the old Ferrari. Yeah. I like an older 911 that obviously is taking the depreciation hit, which they don't really depreciate, if you will, when you're going to go back classically. And then it's kind of moving back up. Go with something that's kind of rare. And, for $100,000, you could get straight up vintage valuable Concours one, or get a newer one that still has a lot of performance things on it. So, you could go that route. Get a 2-year-old, just the highest trim you could get with as much performance, 2-3-year-old, something like that. Or go back, maybe go a little farther back and just, get something that's a legit show car. And I mean, they're not the most drivable things if you're going to get something, that's 30, 40 years old, but I mean, it's a classic. So I was thinking either Ferrari or 911. And then you kind of fill in, what do you want to do with it? I mean, it's a weekend car. Right. So I think, he could go back a little bit farther and get something that's, pretty valuable and still drive it. So, I don't know. I mean, there's like for $100,000, there's so many different things you could go with. That's a little mind-numbing.
Yeah. I tossed this over to some of our other editors just to, sort of get some more ideas. They sort of talked me back off the Ferrari cliff.
Okay.
Yeah,
but 360s weren't the greatest Ferraris, I'd say.
a couple good things would be an Acura Nsx.
Ooh, good one.
A few years old, get around $100,000. Great to drive. In Michigan, you could drive it a lot of the year. It just so cool, so rare. So it's one of my, probably top 5 cars I've driven, just in terms of what I have liked. But then Zach found for sale there a 2014 Audi R8 V10 Spider with a manual transmission. This is back when they had the gated manuals, and it was a little bit of a stretch, at about 120,000. But you could find maybe if you didn't go to Spider route, you could find some pretty cool R8s, whether you want a manual or not, that are going to be, they're not going to lose value. You can drive them again most of the year, and just feels super, super exotic, without while still being an Audi, without having huge reliability concerns. So that's kind of where I ended up through this mental journey. I started with Ferrari and ended up with Audi.
Yeah, I think the R8 is an excellent choice, especially when you consider that the gated shifter
yes,
was such the clacks when you would throw it into gear. It was so satisfying. I was thinking R8, but then I was like, well, I tend to default to 911, which is kind of a cop-out at this point. But yeah, man, that's it. Those are the R8. I think could even feel more special than a 911, just because of 911s. I mean, 911s are great. Like I said, that'd be my choice. But R8s are they're supercars, and they're
especially if you get it with a V10.
Yes,
that engine is just thrilling. You hear it screaming, behind your head, and it just your hair stands up on end, and your blood's racing, and it's wonderful.
All right, well, I think that's a great way to leave it. Please let us know what you end up doing with this. This is a really interesting spend my money. It's always fun to talk supercars and exotics. Thanks for writing, and everybody else, thanks for listening. Thank you, Henrik Fisker, for joining the Autoblog Podcast. Everybody else, have a great weekend. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next time.